Okay, following on from the last example, we're now just going to look at some pretty basic methods of tweening and amending the way that tween appears. So, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to take this model, which is very static. There's no moving limbs on this one. It's just a very plain shape outline. I'm going to select all of the layers, and then I will cut those layers and create a blank one to contain eventually. What I'm doing is I'm creating a symbol in a slightly different way than has been shown in previous videos. This is okay. So go into the library, drop down new symbol, give it a name. So in this case, I'll call it 1. Click OK, and then back to the timeline. Right click over the layer, paste those layers in, and delete the first layer. There we go. And if I select all 3 keyframes, I can then move the whole graphic. I'm going to hover in the right place. I'll get some hints to suggest, okay, so I've got it aligned to the top left, which is by default the position for the registration point. And then scene 1. I can then bring this in from the library by simply dragging and dropping. Go this way a little bit. Zoom out. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll place a motion tween across 24 frames by inserting frame, and then creating a motion tween. I'll then need to move bring the timeline a bit closer. The character at the end of that sequence of frames to the end of the stage. So now we've just got a lateral tween, and what we can do is we can actually amend that motion path, which is symbolised there in a few different ways. For example, I can use the convert tool to hover over anchor points, in this case to create a curve like so, and what we see is an arc like that. You can also amend a curve by hovering over it with the selection tool like so, which can behave in quite strange ways once you've amended the curve the first time. Otherwise it's in quite a uniform way to start off with. Okay. And in our properties, if we select that tween path, we can then change things like the easing. We can change the rotation if we want to rotate the object and the direction of that, or we can orient to path. So if I orient to path, this then inserts a sequence of keyframes. As we go over it, you'll see that the character is oriented based on the rotation of that curve. If I was to try and rotate back at this point, you'll see that that affects the whole sequence, like so. Not necessarily the effect that we would want. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that by unclicking orient to path, and at the end point I'll change the rotation to be a little bit forwards. At the end I'll rotate that to be a little bit backwards that way, and there we go, it's a little bit. I think I'll just add in a few extra frames there and move it ever so slightly across. Change that motion path. And change the rotation at the end point to be a bit more straight. So there's more of a bounce. Okay, so that's one way of animating a symbol and altering the path that it follows. And if I just remove that tween, change the rotation again. If we put a keyframe at the end as though we were creating a shape tween, right click between and create a classic tween. What will happen now is I can create a classic motion guide, which is what's known as a motion path, and in that layer I can then draw or create a shape, or use an edge of some text, for example, if it's big enough to then create the path. You usually follow from the symbol's registration point, transformation point. That's where it gets attached to the path. So I might just go like this. And it should by default attach to that path, at least in the first point. And then what I need to do is find the end point. It should snap at that point there. You see the little circle that indicates that it's snapped to the path. And there we go. A little loop in there. Obviously the symbol's irrelevant, and you can add things in there, but the more complicated it becomes, the less likely it is to work. Okay. And that is how to tween with a classic motion guide. Similarly, you can also, using the properties for that tween, not only snap, but you can orient to path, which will again rotate the symbol like so. That's just that. And that'll be the end of that example.